This is Meiping from CGTN Digital Reporting Live in Beijing. I'm now at the Great Hall of the People, which is the venue for China's Two Sessions. And for those of you who are not familiar with China's Two Sessions, it's one of the most important political events of China. It refers to the annual sessions of the National People's Congress, or NPC, and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or the CPPCC. So today it's March 10th, which is the last day of this year's CPPCC session. And later, in about 15 minutes, the third members' corridor will be held in the press conference hall here. And after that is the closing session of this year's CPPCC. So this year's CPPCC session started on March 4th. And during the past 6 days, the members have submitted their proposals about major political and social issues across the country. And today is the closure for the CPPCC session this year, and tomorrow the NPC session will be concluded. And here I am at the central hall of the Great Hall of the People. And behind me, you can see the doors behind me is the auditorium of the closing session of the CPPCC later. We're not allowed to go inside right now, but maybe you can see through the doors of what it looks like inside. And here I have another thing I want to share with you at the Central Hall. You may have noticed at the beginning of our live streaming is the piano right here. And according to the board, is the biggest piano in the world. It has a length of about 440 centimeters and a width of about 172 centimeters. And the name of the piano is called Xinghai. You can see right here on the piano. And Xinghai, if you translate it directly to English, it says Star Sea, so it's pretty romantic, the name. And the piano is a gift from the Beijing Piano Factory in 1959 as a 10-year anniversary gift to celebrate the founding of the People's Republic of China. So this is something I want to show you at the Central Hall of the Great Hall of the People. And we're now moving to the press conference hall where we'll hold the CPPCC members' corridor later. And we know the CPPCC members, they submit non-binding proposals about important political and social issues of China. And just to give you a number, last year there were over 4,000 proposals submitted by the CPPCC members. But on the other hand, the NPC deputies, they submit motions which are legally binding once adopted. So that's one of the differences between the NPC deputies and CPPCC members about what they do and their roles during the two sessions. So the NPC deputies are lawmakers, and meanwhile, the CPPCC members, they are political advisors. So that's the difference you may want to know. And we're now approaching the press conference hall of the CPPCC member corridor. And just to give you a little preview of what is going to happen later. Okay, here we are. It's not started yet, so we can come inside a little bit. So later here at the press conference hall, the third CPPCC members' corridor will be held. And during this session, the members will share their ideas and their observations during the past years and to provide proposals, as well as answering questions from the reporter. But this year is actually pretty special because during the COVID-19 pandemic, we cannot have face-to-face interviews with the members or the NPC deputies or the ministers. So in this way, we have a pretty smart solutions for that, which is maybe you can see there are two big screens right here. If we can, the camera can go here a little bit. So here are the reporters. They are not in the press conference hall of the Great Hall of the People, but they are now in the media center in another building in Beijing. So it's a real-time video streaming. And later, the members will stand behind the microphones over there, and they can see the reporters in the media center, so they can have a real-time communication with each other. And this room, as well as the media center, are covered by 5G signal, so which make the real-time communication available. And we can see the members are getting ready to for the corridor later. So just let's move. So this is what it looks like behind the corridor. This is all the technologies. You can see the cameras are ready to film the CPPCC members corridor. And just before we switch to CGTN's special 2 sessions coverage, I'd like to share with you one of the proposals I heard during the 2 sessions is about the revival of Chinese culture. Like one of the CPPCC member mentioned, made a proposal about to restore the fist and palm salute, which is a traditional Chinese way of greeting people. It's something like this. I don't know if you are familiar with this gesture. We don't use it nowadays, but back in the ancient time, like everybody used it, and during special occasions now, like spring festivals, we sometimes use this gesture to greet people. And I interviewed one of the another CPPCC member yesterday about this topic, and he said the revival of traditional Chinese culture shouldn't be just focusing on one thing, like one salute or one clothing, traditional clothing, but all the beautiful and representative aspects of the Chinese culture should be inherited, developed, and refreshed. So I think that's one of the things I'd like to share with you. And we also hear about exciting news at the members' corridor. For example, the expert of space exploration mentioned the latest news of our Tianwen-1 Mars probe, which he says the Mars probe, the probe is now traveling in a speed of about 4.8 kilometers per second, and with indicators normal, and it will land on Mars in May or in June. So that's one of the exciting news we heard from the CPPCC members corridor. And we also hear from technology expert about his proposal on paying more attention to cybersecurity in this digital age, because we know that everything is now going online. We have smart vehicles, we have smart cities. So cybersecurity, I think, it's a focus that will be interested and by the members and all the representatives, as well as our media and, of course, citizens in the next couple of years. And it's almost time for this year's 3rd CPPCC members corridor. And we're going to, at the corridor, the members will share their ideas and their hopes for the future of China. So we are now about to switching to CGTN's special coverage of this year's 2 sessions, and you will be watching the corridor, and after that is the closing session of this year's CPPCC session. Once again, I'm Meiping. Stay with us. Thank you for watching.
So we'll bring you live coverage of that, and we'll also live stream on our social media platforms, or you can log on to our app to stay updated. Well, the CPPCC members' corridor press event is expected to start shortly, and journalists can speak directly to our political advisors. So our reporter Su Yiting is now there and has more information.
I'm now standing inside the Great Hall of the People. The 3rd CPPCC member corridor will be held here very soon. And today, 8 political advisors are expected to take the microphones behind me and answer questions from the media. In the previous 15 CPPCC members had met the press via video link, and reporters have raised questions covering a wide range of topics, from agricultural development and food security to poverty eradication and technological innovation. region. And the last CPPCC member corridor is particularly important as it comes ahead of today's closing session of the top political advisory body. I've spoken to members who attend today's corridor. They represent people from all walks of life, from high-level officials to grassroots representatives, from those working in the financial sector to rural areas. Some are from the ethnic minority communities in Tibet and Xinjiang, and others are from Hong Kong and Macau. There are lots of questions media could ask. What policies will China in the economic and financial sector to secure high-quality growth? What's the significance in improving Hong Kong's electoral system and upholding the principle of patriots governing Hong Kong? What will be the guidelines of the country's development over the next 5 years, and what will it mean for ordinary people? The Members' Corridor is a way for political advisors to communicate directly with the public, and the media say it makes the two sessions more open and transparent. Su Yuting, CGTN, reporting from the Great Hall of the People in Beijing.
Yeah, that's a very good question. How transparent will it be in CPPCC and their proposals? And joining me in the studio are Professor Fu Jun from Peking University and Lawrence Brahm, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Welcome to our special coverage, gentlemen.
Thank you.
But the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or CPPCC, is closing today, and as the reporters said, the members discussed a lot of hot issues in Chinese society, like economic growth, rural revitalization, public health, improvement in Hong Kong's electoral system, etc., etc. The question is, CPPCC is not like MPC, which is a national legislature. How much do their words or discussions matter, Mr. Fu?
Well, for any decisions, information is so critical. You need to have a reliable information so you can increase the quality of the law. Now, to understand this body of political advisors, we probably have to talk simultaneously with the National People's Congress. They sort of work simultaneously together. And my take of the CPPCC is CPPCC is for information and the process of information, and they make proposals. And hopefully, if the point is very interesting, through consultation with the two bodies, that will translate into a bill in the MPC, and hopefully again, if you pass the bill, that become a piece of law. This is the way that the two bodies work together. Well, people have compared the CPPCC as the Senate. It's not really the case. It does not have a lawmaking function there. I think political advisors is the word to use here.
Right, and Mr. Fu had a little difficulty in spelling CPPCC. As a foreigner, do you think foreign people have a complete understanding or correct understanding of how Chinese political systems really, or the two sessions really work?
No, I don't think so at all, because I think the Western media kind of sticks on an old 1970s, 80s language that it's rubber stamp, and you hear the same thing over and over again. So repetition creates a particular perception. I think what Professor Fu Jun said that's so key is consultative. It is about consensus building, and this is a very Asian cultural perspective on communication and coming to policy agreement over time. It differs very much from the open debate that you might see in Western political systems, where it's particularly based on personality attacks or bipartisan party positioning, where different parties take situations and regardless of what the other side is saying, whether it makes sense or not, you're against it by virtue of the fact that you're another party. It's the whole concept of duality versus a kind of harmonious amalgamation of commonalities and interests, and trying to put the common perspective forward rather than differences, which is what the consultative process is really all about.
Right.
And this process, I guess, it's open and transparent to people from all walks of life. And as we're talking about this, we're watching live footage from the Great Hall of the People. The Deputy Governor of China's Central Bank is now meeting the press. Actually, this is called Political Advisors Corridor, Members Corridor, really. And this year it goes virtual. So political advisors are actually at Great Hall of the People, and all journalists are at Media Center, another venue not very far from the meeting site of the session. So let's cross live to the scene and take a listen.
谢谢主持人。 我是新华
Thank you
社
very much.
中国新华
I'm
新
with
闻电视网记者，
Xinhua
想提问
News
陈雨露委
Agency
员。
and its
陈委员你
associated
好，
website. My
我们知
question
道
is
融资难、融资贵
directed
一直
to
是制
Chen
约中小
Luyuan,
微企
and
业
we know
健
that
康发展的
difficulties in
难点和
financing
痛点。
has been a
在
main
新冠肺炎疫
obstacle
情的
for
冲击下，
small
中小
and
微企业资
medium-sized
金紧张问
enterprises.
题更
In
加
the face
突
of the
出，
pandemic,
急需
this problem
险中
has
送
become
看。
more
请问
obvious.
金融监管部
And
门
those
采取了哪
SMEs,
些应
they
对
need
措施
help.
来为中
So
小
as
微企业纾
regulators,
困解忧？
what
一
response
些
measures
相
do
关
we
的优
have
惠政策
to
在到
help
期之后
alleviate
是
these
否还会延续
SMEs
呢？谢谢。
out of their problems?
好，谢谢新华社记者的提问。
Thank you very
中小微
much
企
for
业
your
在
question.
国民经济发展中发挥着不可替代的作用。
SMEs play a very
缓解
important part
中小微
in
企业
China's
融资难、
national
融资
economy.
贵是过去一年
Their difficulties
社会各
in
界普遍关注的
financing
重大问
is a
题。
problem that has
也是
drawn
新发展
concern
阶段
from
我
all
国
walks
金
of the
融
society,
基
and
本
this is
实现现代
also
化
a problem
必
that
须
we have to
攻克的
overcome
核心问题。
for China to
2021
achieve
年，人民
modernization
银行
in
的
a new
金融
era.
管理部门
In
坚决地
2020,
执行党中央、国务院的
the
决策部署
People's Bank of China has followed through the guidance of the CPC Central Committee and the central government, and we focused on
累
policy
计设立
issues
了1.8万亿的
at the central level,
专项
and
再
we
贷
have
款和再贴现资
established a
对7.3万亿
re-loan sum
小微
worth
企业
of
贷款
180 million yuan,
延
and
期
for
还款期限的
SMEs,
政策
we
发放了
deferred
4万亿
their
小微
payment
企
of
业
loans,
无抵押的信
and
用贷
we
款
also issued
对于
4 trillion
产业
yuan
链
worth of
供应链上的中小微
non-interest
企业
loans,
发放了
and
2.3
for
万亿的
SMEs
应收
on
账款
major
质押贷款。
industrial lines, and we
上
also
述的这
issued
些
a loan
政
of
策措施
2.3 trillion
一定
yuan.
为
And this policy
3.2
measures
3200多万户的中小
have
企业
helped
和个体工商
32
户
million
及时给予了融资的
small
支持。
and medium-sized enterprises
融资的利率
and different
和费
financial
用率
institutions,
也
and
实现了
the
显著下降。
financing cost has been dramatically
我记得
reduced.
疫情爆发的初期
In the
全国各
beginning
地
days of the
对
epidemic,
抗疫物资有巨大的需
there
求，
was a great demand
生产抗疫物
of
资的
epidemic control-related
都是
materials and supplies, and most of these supplies were produced by small and medium-sized
多家口
enterprises.
罩生产企业
In Hubei,
非常感慨地
Xiantao
说
City, there were a lot of mask producers, and they
小微
told
贷款
us
支持政
that
策
thanks to the preferential loan and credit policies of the POC,
基本上都是
and we were
当
able
天
to
就
submit our
发放保障
application and have the application approved on the same day of the application, and so we truly enjoyed this benefit.
山东省
With the ravaging of the pandemic in Weifang City of Shandong Province,
关键
and
零
there
部
was
件
a
的小微企业
enterprise
遇到了困难，
which manufactures sophisticated medical supplies. And because of the pandemic, it
有
had
500万元的
fewer
贷款
orders,
即将
and
到期
plus it
需要
has a
偿还。
loan from the bank which is worth of 5 million yuan, which will become mature. And then
当地人
the
民银行
entrepreneur wrote a letter asking for help from the local government,
量身
and the
定制了
local bank
还本的续贷的方案，及
customized
时帮
a
助这家企业
loan
度过
mechanism
并且
which
成功地
helped
实
the
现
enterprise
复
to
工复产。
go through the
去年类
difficulty
似这样
and
的故事还
recover
有很多很
its operation. And we had a lot of stories of this
根
kind
本
from
上
last
解
year.
决
But to
中小
solve
微
this
企业
problem
融资难
fundamentally,
融资贵问题一定是一个艰苦卓
we
绝
have
的
to engage in
艰苦的过程
arduous and long-term
在这里，我
efforts.
想告诉大家的好消息是，
What I want to tell you
2021
here today is that in
宏观金融政策
2021,
将会保
our
持
macroeconomic
连续性
policies will be
稳定性
sustained
和可持
in a
续性
stable and sustainable
广大小微
manner.
企业
And
普
all
遍
these
关
small
心
and
的
medium-sized
贷款
enterprises,
延期
they
还
will
本
find
夫
it
妻的政策
easier to
将会延
benefit
续
from the
工融
policies
中
that
介
we
这
issued
些
from
大型
last
商业
year.
银行的普惠小微
Major
贷款
commercial banks
30%
will
以上。
increase 30%
在
of
防控
their
好
total scale
金
of
融风险的基
preferential
础上
loans on the basis
小微
of
企
guarding
业
against
的
financial
抵押信用
risks.
贷款的占比
And
也将
we
会
will
继续
have
上升。
a larger proportion of non-mortgaged preferential loans for
乡村
SMEs,
振兴战略
high-tech
大部分
enterprises and green
农村
enterprises, and
新型
enterprises
经营主体
engaged
等等
in rural
符合新发展
revitalization
理念的中小
and the
微
market
企业
entities
将
from
会得
the
到
rural
特殊
areas,
的
and they
融
will
资
be
支持。
receiving
与此
special
同时呢，
financial support.
我的数
In the
字
meantime,
金融事业将会继续地快速
digital
发展，
financial
大大地
industry
缓
in
解
China
我
will
们小微企业
accelerate, and this
融资
will
当中的信
ease
息不
the
对称的问题，
difficulties of
让我们的中
SMEs
小微企
in
业
financing,
插
and
上金
they
融
will
科
provide
技
a lot
的
of
翅膀，
information
在
support
国
to
民经
those
济开创
SMEs.
新格局当中 发挥新的
So on a new
更大的作
journey
用
of development, they will play an even more
谢谢陈
important
主任
role.
请大家继续提问，请举手示意。
Well, gentlemen, that was political advisor Chen Yilu. He's also the vice governor of the People's Bank of China, China's central bank, really. Now, the focus today looks like is on help to SMEs, small and medium-sized businesses and micro businesses to tide through this, the impacts of the pandemic. It looks like the central authority focuses on credit and loans. Mr. Brem, what do you make of this package of measures?
I think the package is focused on the fact that China has a real economy. If you look at the Chinese economy, about 70% of the GDP would be in the capital market, where in the United States, it's over 300% of the GDP would be allocated in the capital market. So you have a situation where you have real businesses, not just focused on trading commodities and stocks and derivatives, and you have to reboost this. And the way to do it is really through traditional economics, through loans, through the kind of community economics that can actually revitalize people's lives, both in the private sector as well as in the state sector, which will be receiving some of these loans as well. And so I think here you have a very pragmatic, very almost fundamental approach to stable fiscal, financial rebooting of the economy, as opposed to something like launching a 1.9 trillion US dollar package, which is mostly going to end up in the capital market and boosting the stock market anyways, and allowing people to play on that in arbitrage. So I think this is really fundamental to bringing the economy back, creating real jobs for real people and real businesses.
And there is still big problem, and the Deputy Governor also addressed it, that is the cost for SMEs and micro businesses to get those loans you just mentioned. What are the policy messages you've been getting for this year from his remarks?
Stable growth, stability, not volatility. And I think that is really fundamental. And in this perspective, the Chinese economy in many ways, from a financial perspective, is taking a very, very different approach from the market fundamentalism that's being adopted in the US, where again, it's all about the capital market, it's all about stimulus, and it's all about spending. Actually, this is less about stimulus and more about building an economy that can be real and that can be sustainable and have stable growth rather than rapid growth. There's also a change in the pace of growth. If we look back on the 90s, in the first decade of this century, it was all rapid growth, it was all high growth. China was rushing to get ahead to boost its economy. Now it's at a point, particularly in an era of decoupling around the world, where it has to consolidate, focus, and consider the stability of the economy for the long term rather than the rush out of the gates in the short term.
But aiding small and private businesses, of course, help domestic markets regain vitality very soon. That not only benefits China, actually it gives blood, or it notably helps to stabilize the international supply and production chain.
Well, certainly in the terms of coronavirus.
Especially in virus is rampaging.
Of course, it was China that was supplying the face masks, the equipment, the breathing equipment to the world. And now, particularly in the developing nations, it's providing the vaccine. And I think here's a situation where China is looking, when we talk about this concept of a common shared destiny of mankind, this is also often misinterpreted in the Western context. It is really about looking at the fragility of this planet and saying we're all on this planet together. This is a little spaceship in a bubble of air in a vast, vast universe. If we don't maintain this planet, it's like being on a tiny aircraft or spacecraft. The pilots all have to work together. The crew has to work together to keep it going. I think this is very much the approach that's being taken. It's not just about my economy, me first. It's about global stability, because whatever China does that affects the world, that affects China. And I think it's this broader understanding which we're seeing in not only this 5-year plan, the 14th 5-year plan, but the projections of the next 3 to 4 5-year plans, which are actually in the works and part of what's coming out of this joint meeting that's taking place in Beijing.
Let me also add something to put broader perspective. We've been reforming this economy for 40 or so years. And we start from a very dominant state-dominant economy. And so far, the non-state sector mostly small,
All right,
medium-sized
we have to leave it there,
firms.
Professor. We'll continue our discussions later. Let's go to the scene where the members of CPPCC are giving
请
their
南区
perspectives.
第二排靠过道那位记者。
Thank you. From Bloomberg, and my question is to Luo Sangdan. And this year marks the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China and 70th anniversary of Tibet. So in Ali of Tibet, by the end of last year, you have made breakthroughs in terms of electricity supply. So what's your take about the changes in Ali in the past 7 decades? And if you can speak for your hometown, what's going to be your message? Thank you for the questions. 70 years ago, we had emancipated and liberated, and Tibet has started its pathway under the leadership of the CPC towards brightness and prosperity and openness. In 70 years' time, Tibet has transformed into socialist system from the feudal system, and it has also started its industrialization and informatization reform. Take my hometown Ali as an example. This used to be an ethnic area in the border regions, and it was also impoverished and isolated. And poverty has restricted our social and economic development for a long time. In 2018, during the 2 sessions, multiple Tibetan members, me included, suggested to the CPC Central Committee about extending the trunk road to cover Ali. And last December, we have succeeded in the operation of the grid system in Ali. So we have supplied electricity by solving the last 1 kilometer issue, and that also meet the need of about 100,000 local people. Under the leadership of the central government and CPC Central Committee, Ali and Tibet as a whole can finally meet people's aspiration for electricity supply. I can share with you with a set of data. In 1959, the total GDP in Tibet was only 174 million, and the per capita income was 142 RMB yuan. But in 2020, the GDP in Tibet reached 19 million RMB yuan, and the per capita income reached 14,000 RMB yuan. That was transformative change for us. If I can be the spokesperson for my hometown, I hope that for all the Tibetans who have gotten rid of poverty, I would love to say on behalf of them that we used to be covered by the snow caps all year round, but the Tibetan people are all industrious. In Ali, there is one farmer who used to live in poverty with his family members, and they want to renovate their house and walk towards prosperity. In 2018, with other farmers, they established the first engineer group with all the other residents, and also they negotiated with local government, inviting all the locals to be part of the training so as to get rid of poverty at an early date. And with the concern of CPC Central Committee with Xi Jinping as the core, and under the support of people nationwide, now 620,000 poor people in Tibet has gotten rid of poverty in 2020, and 47 poverty-stricken counties have also gotten rid of poverty as well. Now, in terms of sanitation, drinking water, and telecommunication, we have solved all those pragmatic issues. So it is fair to say that peace and liberation allowed Tibetan system to make big strides, and people's livelihood and lifestyle have also been transformed. Thank you very much. Next question.
请北区第一排中间那位记者提问。
Next question, please.
谢谢主持人，我是中国网的
Thank
记
you very
者。
much.
我
I'm
的问
with
题是
China
想提
News
给古力帕利委员。
website,
古力
and
帕利委员，
my
您好。
question is
我
to
们关注
Guli
到
Pawi.
为了提升
And
南疆的基础教育
we
水平
learned that to
2016
improve the
年开始
education in
将
southern
全
part
国
of
的大学
Xinjiang,
的干
and
部到
starting
南
from
疆的农村开展实教工
2019,
作。
we
我
selected
们
a
想
lot of
知道
young
如
cadres
今那里
and
的孩
dispatched
子
them
们
to
怎
the
么样
southern
了？
part of
对于
Xinjiang,
孩
and
子
we
们的
want to
变
know
化，我们
what
也
is
想听
happening
听您的感
in the
受。
southern
谢
part
谢
of Xinjiang, what progress has been made.
谢谢你的提问。
Thank you very much for your
我们
question.
常说，百
We
年大
always
计，
say
教育为本。
that education
我从事
is
教育
the
工作
fundamental
近
priority
40
of
年，
our job.
对
I
新
have
疆
been
教育事业发
an
生的翻
education
天覆地的变化
educationer for
感受
40
很
years,
深。
and I have personally witnessed
尤其是
the
近几年，
progress and developments in
新疆的
Xinjiang
基础
in
教育
education.
得
In
到了
particular,
快
in
速
recent
发展。
years, we have made important
新疆
headways.
全区
in
学前
Xinjiang
3年毛入院率
The
和
preschool entry rate and
得到了
education
快速
coverage
的
rates in
明显的
Xinjiang
提
have
升，
registered obvious and rapid
取得
increases
这样好的
over the
成绩
years.
得益
And this
于
is a
党的
very
好
good
政策
result thanks
得益
to
于
the good policies of the
教育工作者
CPCA,
的不懈努
and
力。
it can be attributed to the
从2016年起，
endeavors of
自治区选
educationers
派干部到
one
南疆
generation
支教，
after another. Since 2018,
让孩
the
子们
Xinjiang
从
Autonomous
小接
Region
受到良
has
好的学前
started
教
to
育，
select cadres and
对
dispatch
提
them
高
to
新疆
the southern part
基
of
础
the
教育水平
Xinjiang
发挥了非常重要
Autonomous
的
Region,
作用。
and they have played the important role in improving the basic
有
education
很多支
of
教干部。
Xinjiang. I
今
have a lot of
天和
colleagues
大家一起
who
分享一
were
个小故
dispatched
事。
to this part of the Xinjiang Autonomous Region, and let me share with you a small story. In Akasu's Awaji County, we have
小
a
阿
small
布
village called
让支教
Kabawa,
干部夏一旦老师很是头疼，
and we have a naughty boy,
小
Xiao
阿布
Abu,
经常撕
because
同学的
Xiao
书，
Abu often tears apart the books of his classmates, and he's also a bully in the campus, and teachers couldn't discipline him. And then we paid a visit to his family, and we learned that Xiao Abu actually grew up with his grandma, and his mother passed away
很长时
very
间
early,
才
and
回家一
his
次。
father was working
父母
in
爱的缺
a
失
distant place, and
让
there
小
is
阿布
this
啊，
lack
他
of
就是想通过恶
parenthood
作剧
in his family. So
向
that is
明
why
世老师
Xiao
对
Ali
他更多的
wants
关注。
to draw attention from his teachers
夏一旦
by
老师
engaging in those
了解到
hoaxes.
这个情况之
After
后，
learning this situation,
就用更多的时间
the
去
teacher
关注、
spent
帮
more
助
time
关心小阿布的学习
understanding
和
him
生活。
and
在
providing a
班
lot
里
of
也
personal
给他
helps.
更
And
多的表
inside the
现机会。
classroom, the teacher gave him a lot of chances
小阿
to
布
answer
就
questions.
成为了夏一
Within a
旦
very
老师
short
的
period
小
of
助
time,
手。
Xiao Ali became a great
他在
helper
班里最爱
to
唱
the
的一首
students,
歌
and
就
Xiao
是
Ali likes
幼
to
儿
sing
园
a
是
song
我家，
in a
老师
classroom,
像妈妈。
and he said that the
在
parents
他的
are
眼
just
里，
like the
夏一
teachers
旦
are just
老
like
师
parents to him,
就是他的
and
小妈妈。
in the eyes of Xiao
在
Ali,
新疆
his teacher
有一
is
大
just
批
like his
像
mother.
夏一旦一样默默无闻的支教干部，
In Xinjiang, we have a
正是他们
very
无私的
huge
奉
group
献，
of teachers,
在
just
孩
like
子们的心里
Xia
播
Dan,
下了爱的
who
种
is the
子，
teacher of Xiao Ali, and
给
it's
他
just
们
like
带来了
it's just
希望
teachers
和
like
梦想、
her
快
who
乐与幸福。
spread hope and faith and happiness
我
to
常
the
和
children
支教
in
干部
Xinjiang.
聊天的时
I
候，
always talk with
他们
my
挂在嘴边
colleagues
最多
who
的
were
一句话
dispatched
就
to
是
the southern part of
爱
Xinjiang,
可以改
and
变一
they
切。
told me that love
正是
can
因为
change
有爱，
everything, and
孩
it's
子们
exactly
脸上的
because
笑
of
容
love
才笑得那
that
样
there are
灿烂和
smiles
阳光。
on the face
也
of the
正是因为
kids.
有爱，
And
新
it's
疆的基础
exactly
教育
because of love
才会焕
that the
发出
basic
勃勃
education
生
in
机。
Xinjiang is now taking
这
on a new
一切
look.
的改变，就是全体
The reason
支教老
behind
师
all
们
the changes
幸福感的来源
and
和
the source of
教育的
happiness
意义所在。
of
作为
these
一名
teachers
教育工作者，
is the love that they
我
devote
愿意
to
与
this
大
region.
家一道
As an
把
educator,
爱传
I'm
递下
willing
去。
to spread the
谢谢。
love to a larger
谢谢古力
area.
帕利委员。
Thank you.
请大家
Very interesting story there told by the member of CPPCC from Uyghur Autonomous Region that they told Aksu tearing apart other students' books. It's like I'm seeing my childhood once again.
Right.
Apparently, they're facing the same problems of left-at-home children, but they're also sharing the same economic and social development of the country.
Yes, and from those CPPCC members who have just met the press, we can also tell the diversity of the makeup of CPPCC members.
Right.
It tries to reach the widest possible sectors and groups of people in this society.
You know, the ethnic minority population actually accounts for 8.41% of the total Chinese population, but the ethnic CPPCC members account for 11.7% of the total number. That means that tells us a lot, indeed, that we have more representatives from the ethnic groups than their population.
That's right. I think that's why we have this consultative process that trying to reflect people's voices in a constructive way. And talking about this, how about we start with the angle of poverty alleviation, because China has just announced at the end of 2020 that it has eliminated extreme poverty, and that includes all those remote and far away, and sometimes, as the CPPCC member mentioned, somehow isolated areas. How important is education in this process, Mr. Brown?
It's absolutely fundamental. I've spent much of my career doing documentary films in some of the most remote rural parts of China, where there has been pockets of poverty. And a large part of that is because of inaccessibility, lack of roads, lack of communication. We just heard from one of the delegates is electricity is fundamental. If you have electricity, you can read at night. And it's this basic infrastructure, which is your first stage, but then your second stage is actually providing the education. Because particularly as we're moving away from being an agriculturally or herding-based society as it was 40 years ago when I came to China, it's now moving rapidly, not beyond industrialization, into the technology era. And you can have access to technology, of course, in some of these very remote mountain areas. Education is fundamental, and I believe that it is a national asset to invest in the education of the next generation. One of the challenges that's occurring in countries of the West, like the United States and Europe, is students graduate from university with a life ahead of them, burdened in debt. In order to have an education, you go into debt, you go into servitude. And that is a fundamental violation of human rights, because actually it is that, the children, the youth are the national asset. They should not be considered a national debt burden. And I think that the future of China, in its growth, its development, in both an ecological way, in a multi-diverse way, will depend very much upon such continued programs of education across the country, across the broad spectrum of the population. And I think with that commitment, it's a commitment not to the present, not to the past, it's a commitment to the future.
Right. And the CPPC member from Uyghur Autonomous Region, from Tibet, also said there is a problem of basic education in rural areas, in ethnic minority areas, that the teachers there, the basic education teachers there, are being short of. How do you think that the government should address this problem?
Well, in a way, we want to spread wealth, but a fundamental way is to...
Wealth or knowledge?
I said fundamentally it's about knowledge, I very much agree with Lawrence. Well, for academics, we do different kinds of analysis trying to pin down the fundamental causes of wealth, but at the end of the day, it's your brain.
Right.
Okay? And the rest are derivatives. Yeah. If you say, okay, you have poor infrastructure, you have poor institutions, these are part and parcel of what our human brains can create in a way. So when they are young, education, to bring out the creative power of you.
The problem is that...
And the other part, physically, okay, this is sort of the spiritual. Physically, you must have good health. Okay, so powerful brain, good health, infrastructure, link them together. Then it's the recipe.
To get down to the problem of the villages, the rural areas are being short of teachers.
Yes.
How do you think that problem should be addressed?
Well, part of that should be addressed by the government, and a part of that should be addressed by private sector. I'm encouraged to see that China has been doing a lot on the part of the government. 9 years compulsory education, and if you want to see the effects, you look at the dramatic process of industrialization. It has much to do with the 9-year compulsory education, even though quality varies across countries. And our private sector,
so
we have volunteers going to the remote areas.
Also is
yes,
a part of
to the remote areas to that.
Now let me we have to leave it there. Let's go to the site to see the CPPCC members' delivery of a
from China
perspective.
Daily. My question is to member Cai Hualin. The youngsters are a strong force, loving their nation, and as we know, you have been transmitting the culture of patriotism, the spirit of the national flag among the youngsters, so that they love their nations. In Hong Kong as well, you did this. So what's your take on such an effort? What's your purpose of doing that? Thank you for your questions. Before Hong Kong returned to the motherland, we didn't have such courses to educate the youngsters about loving their nation and motherland. But later on, because of the Occupy Central movement, it exposed a lot of problems in Hong Kong's education. Many youngsters have mistake in terms of their understanding of the motherland. So Hong Kong's education must learn from the mainland China. And Hong Kong, of course, differs from the mainland China in certain ways. Raising the national flag is just a cultural reflection. It's not mandatory. For example, on many festivals like the date that we commemorate the returning of Hong Kong to the mainland China, we would raise the flags, but we raise the flags only on those several important occasions. And also, we established the national flag raising team in 2002, and it was organized by a charity organization. It aims to teach the youngsters how to sing national anthem and how to raise the national flag. But this is a very influential team. They can go to different schools to teach the students in person about how to do those things. There were about 200 schools before, but now there are 500 schools covered by such an education. I hope we could do more. At 8 o'clock every morning, when the kids gather in the playground, witnessing the national flag raised, they would realize very strongly that they are Chinese and they are proud of themselves. Every year, we also hold different competitions and performances inviting all sorts of schools. And also we invite the PLA soldiers to be there to guide the students. We aim to educate the children about how strong China is. And Hong Kong is an integral part of China. The patriots governing Hong Kong is the consensus of the society in Hong Kong. I do hope that in the future Hong Kong can educate more students who understand their social responsibility of the whole nation, the society, and also the Hong Kong. They must be proud of China and do more to return to China. Thank you. Next question.
请南区第一排靠过道那位记者提问。
谢谢主持人。
Thank you.
我是中央广播电视总台
From
CGTN 的记者。
CGTN.
非常希望能够向张宗珍委员进
I
行提
do
问。
want to raise some
赵委员您
questions
好。
to member Zhang Zhongzhen.
世界关注中国的一
The
国两
world
制。
has put their eyesight on the one country, two systems in China, and how is the culture of China influencing the different regions. For example, how to establish the cultural identity of those several regions. And what's the updates in Macau? Could you share with us about your observations? Thank you for your questions. Macau was the first port opening to the outside world, and when China is engaging with the international culture, Macau has stayed rooted in terms of the traditional Chinese culture. That's one main concept of one country, two systems. As our song sings it, once we were occupied by the invaders, what they did to us was only physically, not intellectually. So the Chinese culture was transmitted to the Western world and even influencing the Western philosophies. For example, the Western science, painting, and artists, they were also in turn transmitted to China through Macau during those years of occupation. And in Macau schools, we integrated a lot of traditional Chinese culture in the disciplines, and they were kept in completeness in Macau. We have emphasized on many occasions that in Macau we highlighted both the Chinese culture and Western culture, and carrying forward the Chinese culture is the secret mission of the Macau government. December 20th was a festive moment for Macau because it commemorated the returning of Macau to China. And also, this was a good example of the history. On that date, President Xi Jinping visited Macau University, giving instructions to the college students. That was an open course, historical in the Chinese history in the past 5,000 years. President Xi Jinping reviewed the history of China to integrate the value of Chinese culture and igniting the passion of Macau youngsters in loving China. And also from a cultural perspective, the youngsters rethought about what is the most suitable system for Macau and China, and why aren't those Western systems suitable for China and Macau included. And finally, the rich consensus that culture and beliefs will be the basis of a good social system. And finally, we reached the consensus on the socialist system, and only the CPC has such open-mindedness and pragmatism to lay the solid foundation for Macau development with the one country, two systems. And that one country, two systems is offering freedom to Macau. For any promise made by the CPC, they are honored, with no exception. And more importantly, when Macau develops and when we bump into difficulties, for example, any objection, the CPC Central Committee would respond to us. It's just like a mother answering the call of the beloved son. So, in return, we shall listen to the ideas of the CPC Central Committee and follow the guidance of it. So, when we commemorate the anniversary of CPC Central Committee, I have to emphasize that it is our common consensus to follow the guidance and leadership of CPC. From a cultural perspective, Macau also contemplates about and embrace the leadership of CPC. We aspire to the Great Wall spirit, the Yellow River and Yangtze River and Tiananmen Square. Among the kids in Macau, 1/4 of them pursue education in the Chinese mainland. And also, with the leadership of the CPC, we have once paid visit for some field studies. Once we were hit by the imperialists. I think in history, the Chinese culture has 4 edges. The 1.4 billion Chinese among all the nationals in the world are the most hardworking, and also we are industrious and largest in number. And as to the party members of the CPC, they're the most organized and people-oriented among all the parties, and including rural parties in the world. Thirdly, China boasts 5,000 years of history. That's the longest in the world. Fourthly, after 4 decades of reform and opening up, China today, more than any time in the history, has more sound fundamentals of the economy. So we have the confidence about China. And as to the emergence of China, Macau people are proud, and we are also proud about the Chinese culture. And I also have to inform you that we are deeply convinced that the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is unstoppable. Thank you.
请大家继续提问，请举手示意。
Next question, please.
请北区第3排中间那位记者提问。谢谢主持人，我是团结报团结网记者。
Thank you very much. I'm with Unity News, and my question is to Mr. Pan. And we see that as long as we are still in the lunar first year, we are still celebrating the Spring Festival. And you are from Chinese Taiwan, and can you share with us some of the stories from our Taiwan compatriots and how they celebrated their new Spring Festival in the Chinese mainland? Thank you very much for your question. To my knowledge, due to the pandemic this year, we have roughly 70,000 compatriots from Taiwan. We're celebrating the Spring Festival in the Chinese mainland, which is double the size of previous years. Taiwan compatriots answered the call of the central government to celebrate the New Year in the Chinese mainland, and this in itself is a great support to China's response measures against COVID-19. To make the Taiwan compatriots feel at home in the Chinese mainland, a number of activities were organized. For example, cloud celebration and online activities were organized, and hundreds of compatriots connected with us online celebrating the Spring Festival in the Chinese mainland, and a lot of the compatriots expressed their wishes to this country, and they expressed the hope that China can achieve reunification on an early date. Well, just imagine if more Taiwan compatriots can share the same consensus, and if they understand that unity is the only way forward, and then we can expect a reunification sooner, and we can also expect a sooner revitalization of the Chinese nation. As for the prospect of cross-strait development, and let me share with you some stories. I know a tea farmer who is operating in Fujian, and they are living and working in Fujian as 4 generations of the family, and they are living there very happily in Fujian province. We have another businessman from Taiwan who told me that right now the Chinese mainland is doing much better in environment and in economic development, and that is why he brought his mother from Taiwan to Chinese mainland. Over the past 2 years, we have a lot of doctors, lawyers, and teachers from Taiwan who are now working in the Chinese mainland. The number is growing in very big sizes, and you can see that the integrated cross-strait development has truly benefited a lot of the compatriots in Taiwan. This is felt more strongly in these days. At present, although the cross-strait relations have encountered some difficulties, but we will never be hampered by the difficulties we encounter at present, and we believe that there will be a promising prospect laying ahead. And with the deepening of the 14th Five-Year Plan, and with the integrated cross-strait development, I believe that there will be thorough connections between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, and true and real and substantial benefits will be brought to people living on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. As a member of the CPPCC and as a member from Taiwan, I will express the voice of Taiwan compatriots at the CPPCC meeting, and I will always follow the developments of integrated cross-strait relations, and in so doing, I can make my own contribution for the integration of Taiwan compatriots in the Chinese mainland. I would like to say that we belong to one family, and compatriots on both sides should work to promote the integration between the two sides so that we can work to achieve an earlier reunification. Thank you very much to all the three members.
So members from Hong Kong and Macau and Taiwan all spoke just now. No matter where you're from, we did the same thing just a few days ago to celebrate the Chinese New Year, which means that we share the same cultural identity. And the education on having that kind of identity is very important.
Exactly. Having said that, I was quite impressed by the words from CPPCC member from Macau, Mr. Zhang Zongzhen.
Right.
And from his resolute tone, you can tell that he's really proud of being part of the Chinese nation, and he really focuses on the way forward. For example, the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, and he talked about the spiritual character of Macau's youth. You can sense that vibrant atmosphere there.
Right, and CPPCC actually gives them the opportunities to make the voices from those three regions of Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan to be heard by the central government. And that's one of the main functions of CPPCC, to unite all fronts. Now, CPPCC will soon wrap up this year's meeting. So now let's go to our reporter Dong Xue at the Great Hall of the People. Dong Xue, so what will be the key focus on the closing ceremony?
Well, Donnie, in just a matter of minutes, the fourth session of the 13th National Committee of the CPPCC will hold its closing session. Wang Yang, the chairman of the nation's top political advisory body, is expected to deliver the speech that will wrap up the session. Well, this year's gathering has been compressed into 8 days due to the coronavirus restrictions still in place. That's down from the usual 2 weeks. Despite the shorter schedule on the domestic front, officials have held talks on various proposals, such as how to build a more secure China, implement the country's rural vitalization strategy, and deal with an aging society. They've also discussed ways to launch a major national science and technology program and develop a high-quality education system and modernize industrial and supply chains. While on the international front, top of the headlines has been the proposed reform to Hong Kong's electoral system. At the opening session of the CPPCC, Wang Yang has called on members to support the central government's drive to make sure Hong Kong is governed by patriots. He called for strength and unity with the compatriots in Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, and asked for greater efforts to foster patriotism among the young people in Hong Kong. Well, I've also been talking to a number of CPPCC members from Hong Kong this year. They had a number of proposals for this year's gathering. For instance, Kenneth Folk, I've been talking to as vice president of the Hong Kong Olympic Committee, says he wants to help young people in Hong Kong take advantage of opportunities in the Greater Bay Area, especially in the culture and sports sector. He told me patriotism needs to be strengthened in the Chinese city. To achieve this, he's encouraging the city's CPPCC members to engage with people from a broad range of backgrounds, especially young people. He also said it's important to involve them in the nation's latest development opportunities. Having said all this year also marks the beginning of China's 14th five-year plan, the socio-economic blueprint for the next half a decade. Goals including boosting domestic demand, upgrading supply chains, increasing technology sufficiency, and further reforming domestic markets. It's hoped this will increase opportunities for foreign investors across different sectors and drive China's growth for the next 5 years. Dongning.
Thank you very much, Dong Xue.
Right, as we just talked about that, our colleague Tian Wei raised the question at the just concluded members' corridor. So now let's cross live to her. Hello, Tian Wei, you raised this question focusing on Chinese culture. So are you happy with the answers you've got?
Yes, indeed, Pan Deng. Earlier, I got the chance to ask the CPPCC member, Mr. Zhang Zongzhen from the Macau SAR. As you may know, Macau is like Hong Kong, is one of those SARs of China. It returned to China in 1999. Mr. Zhang told us a lot about what has been done in Macau in terms of encouraging the young people to learn more about the Chinese culture and the Chinese cultural roots. And he also emphasized, in fact, it is about the very beginning, even before 1999, the Chinese cultural roots has been deeply cultivated in the minds of many in Macau. And of course, after the return to China, in the schools and also among the civil servants, a Pledge of Allegiance, raising the national flag, singing the national song, supporting patriots governing Macau has been the tradition. He also introduced a number which I think is very important. He said 1/4 of the students in Macau actually have been learning on the mainland. That's a very interesting and encouraging number. Having said that, though, the reason I asked that question has a lot to do with the agenda this year at the National People's Congress. One of them is to improve the Hong Kong election system. Now, I've been talking to, as you know, over the past 1 week, various CPPCC members, some of them serving in the Hong Kong SAR government, some of them are from different walks of life in Hong Kong. Here's what they told me, several points. One, patriots governing Hong Kong is a must. It's a must for any country, any city, to have someone who loves the country, loves the city, to serve the country and to serve the city. And in Hong Kong, it's no exception. Second, the improving of the election system is about improve the efficiency of decision making in Hong Kong, not let filibuster preventing important decisions and the rule and laws regarding Hong Kong that are going to serve the Hong Kong people's ultimate interest. Third, they also say it is almost like an analogy. Faster running train, Hong Kong is heading to the destination. If it's running on the wrong track, it will be going nowhere. However, when it's running on the wrong track, if it is being corrected into the right track, it is going to the destination, which is the one country, two systems. Back to you, Pan Deng.
Thank you very much, our colleague Tian Wei at Media Center in Beijing. You're watching a special live coverage on China's annual political season. Stay with us.
NPC and CPPCC, China's biggest annual political gathering of lawmakers and political advisors. As the world's second largest economy recovers from the pandemic, it chalks out plans for the coming year and beyond. With new proposals, laws, and targets, CGTN brings you unmatched coverage of the meetings that matter. Exclusive interviews, people's voices, in-depth analysis, and the impact on the rest of the world. China's 2 sessions begins March 4th. Live and exclusive on CGTN.
How will China innovate? Where do the Chinese spend their money on? How will China fulfill its promise for carbon neutrality? And what will China do next for pandemic prevention and control? China's annual political season this year focuses on the blueprint of the country's next 5 years. I will bring you up close to the 2 sessions to feel the pulse of this dynamic place and note the nuance of its evolution.
Dual circulation, not just a buzzword in China, but a new, forward-thinking economic strategy offering access to a huge market. Incentives to help businesses go global. Seamless logistics and state-of-the-art innovation. Find out how dual circulation will shape the future of China and the world on CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. This is a special live coverage on China's annual political season. The coming up main event on Wednesday afternoon is the closing ceremony of this year's CPPCC session. Before that, let's get some global news updates from my colleague Wang Yang. Hello there.
Thanks, Pendong. Well, let's get straight to Equatorial Guinea. The death toll there has risen to 98 from Sunday's explosions at military barracks in the coastal city of Bata. At least 615 people have been reported wounded in the blasts. President Teodoro Obiang Nguema visited the site of the explosions and said an investigation is underway. Now, an initial report released on Tuesday says the blaze may have begun when a farmer set fire to his plot in order to prepare it for food production, and then a breeze spread the flames to
Su Yiting has been following filed this report.
The CPPCC were active in the fight against COVID-19 in 2020 and promptly engaged organizations across the country to combat the pandemic. That's according to China's top political advisor Wang Yang, who made the comments during the work report on Thursday.
Working to improve major epidemic prevention and control mechanisms and facilitate the resumption of production and business operations, we actively supported the efforts to ensure sustainability on 6 fronts and maintain security in 6 areas.
Wang Yang said the top political advisory body will have further sessions in various formats to facilitate the formulation of China's 14th five-year plan.
We will hold bi-weekly consultative forums, consultative meetings on the handling of proposals, online deliberation and consultations, consultative meetings with relevant departments of the party and government, and sector-specific consultations to deliberate and offer suggestions on state affairs.
The CPPCC says it plays an increasingly important role in carrying out its functions of political consultation, democratic supervision, and participation in political affairs. Proposals from advisors generate a lot of public interest and will help the country to formulate better policies, not only to shape China's future development, but also have very important implications for the world. Su Yuting, CGTN, reporting from the Great Hall of the People in Beijing.
Well, you may have noticed that the sign language appeared at the 2 sessions meeting, and that shows the inclusiveness of China's 2 sessions in terms of representatives and members of CPPCC and MPC. So understanding the world's most populous country is key to grasping the headlines coming from the 2 sessions. Over the past week, we have been running a series featuring current affairs commentator Einar Tangen, who offers his take on China. Here he explains how the country's political system really works.
I've worked in law, politics, investment banking, and ran my own businesses. And I've advised the US, South Korean, and Chinese governments. How does the world see China? How does China see the world? I'm Einar Tangen. Find out on Tangen on China, a special series during the 2 sessions. China's NPC and CPPCC are often portrayed as legislative rubber stamps. Let's get into how they work so you understand the differences between the popular misconceptions and the reality. In a one-party political system like China's, there are no politicians. Governance rests on trained and experienced professionals who may have different thoughts and approaches, but who are collectively responsible for creating and implementing policies and laws. To do this, every proposed new policy or law is carefully measured against the long and intermediate range plans and then sent down for comments and proposals for specific implementation actions. By sent down, I mean all the way down to every village in the country, where it then percolates back up to the national level, gathering substance, including budgets, timelines, milestones, and at the end of this journey, the entire policy or law is reviewed again to make sure it conforms to the 5-year or longer plans and goals. By the time it arrives for passage at the 2 sessions, the new policy or law has been thoroughly reviewed and commented on, including by the lawmakers themselves as leading officials, affected groups, and the public at large. All that remains is to give the new policy or law official approval and enter it into the official policies, laws of the country. In Western-style political systems, civil servants advise and implement laws and policies passed by politicians. Politicians need the bureaucrats because modern governments are complex mechanisms where changing one piece results in changes to other pieces. Politicians are elected based on their ideas, but they don't have to be qualified in terms of knowledge or experience. There's an underlying belief that new ideas and approaches will create better, more efficient government. So, When laws are proposed in such systems, while they go through committee and bureaucratic reviews, those who propose and pass it take much more of a hit and hope approach. Different systems have different procedures. China spends about 100 times more time in the beginning to make sure its policies and laws are practical, harmonized, and implemented. Western-style political systems spend less time up front, tending to see new policies and legislation as expression of ideological will, which the bureaucrats will be responsible for figuring out. So what does this mean for China? For 40 years and the foreseeable future, China will use its planning approach to advance the interests of its people. When improvements are needed or mistakes are made, they will go through the same process as the original policies or laws. What does this mean for the rest of the world? As countries struggle with an increasingly complex world where change and planning are crucial, they need to study different systems which allow them to accomplish their goals within the ideological, cultural, social, legal norms of their respective countries. No system is universal or right. There are many paths to prosperity, but understanding other systems will prevent you from making poor assumptions about other systems. For instance, believing that China's 2 sessions is a legislative rubber stamp.
As we're talking about this is happening now. The closing ceremony of this year's CPPCC session is underway. Political advisors are voting on political resolutions during this closing ceremony. This just came in. Political advisors have just approved a work report from the Standing Committee of China's top political advisory body. Also, they have approved a report on proposal-related work. And of course, we'll keep you updated as the closing ceremony is underway.
Right, and back to Aina Tangen's piece, which has a very brilliantly illustrated the distinctiveness of Chinese political system.
Right.
So let's go back to our guests. Professor Fu, Aina Tangen just described what's called a consultative democracy, which he said it was a distinct political system of its own. Can you elaborate more on that? Why does it have to be a distinct political of our own?
Well, historically, China was very sophisticated in terms of its bureaucracy. That continues today. Bureaucrats have power, and also they need to have information. So in terms of decision making, it's not just a one-time thing. It's a process. A process vis-a-vis one-time shot is so important for us to understand the Chinese system. Delivery means it's a process, not just one vote. And the other part is much has been taught about the Chinese long-term. We have short-term things. We also have long-term things. Spelled out here today in China is we have 5-year plan. We have 5-year plan before reforms. But even though in English we use the same word 5-year plan, but in reform terms, it's more a guidance. Than sort of
5-year proposal.
No, it's a guidance.
It's guidance.
With strength of bureaucratic fiat, but it's a more relaxed form of a very command and control 5-year plan. So in other words, we take a middle road between a plan system and a market-driven system. And the proportion of both, if you watch closely, has been changed. We let the market play gradually a growing role in that system, because I guess the elites at least understand in terms of allocative efficiency, there are compelling evidence market has worked. We learned that from Xiaogang case, rural areas. We also learned that from the industrialization process, and we have learned from our opening up to the rest of the world. So one word can be difficult to understand. You have to understand the nuances. Now, the other thing we need to understand, even if you do not like a system or institution, ultimately it's historically, socially embedded. You cannot just impose.
Right.
You need to have a sense of direction and let it grow eventually. You can push it a little bit. Now, in macroeconomic management, I guess a growing number of Chinese, especially educated people, can be critical, but they understand macroeconomic management is not the source of growth. But the reality is when you grow the economy, there will be ups and downs and ups and downs. So macroeconomic control's rule is to out those very too dramatic things. And ultimately, the growth comes from education, brain, better technology, learning from each other. That's why China continued to push the idea and the measure of let the economy open, even at a higher level, higher equilibrium.
Right, and education.
Now, as we're talking about this, I have to update on the latest happening at the closing ceremony of this year's CPPCC session. Political advisors have just approved a report on examination of the proposal-related work. So, gentlemen, let's talk about this. This is Chinese democracy in action. I think it's very fair to say that. So, Mr. Bram, earlier we talked quite a lot about consultation and the deliberative process, but another key function of the political advisory body itself is democratic supervision. What do you make of this year's actions in this particular regard?
Well, I'll turn to a story, an old story. In the 18th century, they say Emperor Qianlong dressed up as an ordinary person to circumvent his own bureaucracy and go to the south and go to tea houses and listen to what the people had to say. So if we're going to flip it, what's happening now is they're bringing the people to Beijing. And so this is all about multidisciplinary functions across a vast, vast spectrum of professions, from law, finance, banking, we've heard all that, to agriculture, and of course all the different regions, and of course diversity. And in that, by bringing these voices into the room, you're building a consensus of opinion. You're also gathering from them what are the key issues, what are the key concerns, where can you link up the dots, and where can you come up with policy to address those issues. So there's a lot of preventive medicine in the long-term planning that's coming out of these meetings through the combination of a multidisciplinary approach with diversity in building consensus.
Well, the problem with your story, a little story, is that the Qianlong talked to the ordinary people, but now in CPPCC we saw more elites, less grassroots. So how do you comment on that composition? Do you think that's inclusive enough? Enough voices?
No, I still see logic of that. That story is very good. If you build a bureaucracy, sophisticated bureaucracy, and the bureaucrats tend to sit down, and you need to have a separate channel of information. And for that, you also see arrangements, supervision system, different lines of reporting. Now, it all comes down to checks and balance, if you may. You need to balance that. And you may be critical, but the next challenge is, can we recalibrate a little bit so that next time it can be performing better? There will be problems of all systems. But as I said, institutions are socially and historically embedded, right? And so far, it seems China has been moving in the direction that is efficient. Look at the very dramatic growth rates. Well, we have been bringing 1.4 billion people from $150 per capita to 10,000. The better performer ones are 60,000, but you are bringing 1/5 of a human population to that level.
Exactly. Yeah.
The challenge is enormous.
I want to challenge you because you said that it's all elites. I mean, I know so many people who are CPPC members who've come up from the grassroots, who've come up from the village, who've been in business, who've done such a spectrum of work. I mean, they've had their hands on some of the hard tasks of agriculture, business, and even one of the CPPC representatives used to be my assistant when I was a lawyer in Hong Kong. So I like to tell all the people working for me, one day you could be there too.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that particular member. How did he or she?
No, she was an assistant when I was a lawyer in Hong Kong,
advisor.
And we were working on, in those days, it was back in the 1990s, and foreign investment was coming into China, and she was my assistant. We were doing negotiations and contract writing. Later, she went on herself to have her own law career, and eventually became a member, of course, of LegCo in Hong Kong, and over time became a member here. And so, you see that kind of, I remember when she was a young kid working for me. I've watched her go through the entire process. And so, I think hands-on, the front line, negotiating joint ventures, working on contracts in those old state-owned enterprises in those days at the grassroots, and then now looking at the very top. When you're sitting there in the room, in the Great Hall of the People, you know what it's like to be in the field. You know what it's like to be working in the enterprise. You know what it's like to be doing business. You know what it's like to be running your own law firm. So I think in that way, again, it's this diversity of opinion and bringing that into the room, which is so essential in a consultative process.
Yeah, my question is which one is better, or which one should be implemented? More voices from the grassroots that represent the common people's complaints or suggestions, or more intellectuals who have macro knowledge of certain fields?
You need a balance of both. You need to have both in the room, of course. If you have only intellectuals,
then
it's ivory tower
situation?
stuff.
Is it balanced?
Look, you can always find improvements. You can always reach out more. But I think the intention of this system is to find that balance. And the one thing that's made the Chinese economy so successful over what I've seen of 40 years of transition is constantly seeking that balance. I mean, things do get tipped off from time to time. The economy runs too quickly. You might have too many debts. You might have all kinds of distortions. But as soon as that happens, it's the macro control system and the ability to combine market, free market, with planning, and to be able to look at this harmonization in kind of a yin-yang type of harmony. And I think that's the essence of the culture of China and many Asian countries. It's balance.
Let me add a very typical Western view of looking at this when it comes to real issues. Plato, okay, very Western, okay? Plato asked this question, okay? When you are sick, do you consult a doctor or do you consult villagers? You have to be issue specific, balancing.
Means knowledge or experience?
When I'm sick, I consult Kung Fu masters that I train with, because they're always seeking balance. And usually, sickness is caused by imbalance.
Now, the point I'm making is it's easier for us to say without the context, okay? Well, ideas are very important. Eventually, you need to contextualize the ideas so that you know where and what's the best way to balance the ideas you have with the ugly reality that you have faced. But with the determination, we want to improve.
Right, and actually one of the topics that CPPC members talk the most is about the 14th five-year plan. 2021 is the first year of the 14th five-year plan. The plan actually stresses switch from high speed to high quality development. So why do you think the switch is happening?
Well, it's slowing down. A simple recipe for growth is a function of land, labor, capital. You know. So
okay, we have to leave it there, Professor.
Let's cross live.
各位委员、同志们、
fellow members,
中国人民政治协商会议第13届全国委员会
the fourth session of the 13th
圆满完成
CPPCC
各项议程，
has completed all the agendas and is about to conclude.
国家主席
General Secretary of CPC Central Committee, President and Chairman of the Central Military Commission, Comrade Xi Jinping and other high-ranking leaders of the party attended the meeting and discussed the state affairs with all the members. Members deliberated on the government's work report, the draft guideline of the 14th five-year plan, as well as other reports. Members also reviewed the work report of the CPPCC National Committee. We made policy suggestions and consolidated the consensus, reaching positive results. which fully reflected the sense of responsibilities of all the CPPCC members, which also demonstrated the advantages of CPPCC as a top political advisory body. The meeting focused on the 14th Five-Year Plan, new development pattern, and generated positive energy and encouraged all the members to engage in socialist modernization drive. And this is a conference of democracy, unity, and progress. This year marks the 100th founding anniversary of the Communist Party of China. It is also the first year of the 14th Five-Year Plan and the first year of China embarking on a new journey of socialist modernization drive. The CPPCC must follow the guidance of Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, strengthen for awarenesses, boost for confidences, and practice the two maintenances, and implement the decisions of the CPC Central Committee and the work it entrusted to the CPPCC, and gather the wisdom of Chinese men and women at home and abroad, and make positive contribution to opening a new chapter of China's socialist modernization drive. We must consolidate our standing and unswervingly strengthen the leadership of the CPC. The party's leadership is the fundamental political system in China. As an important platform for strengthening party's leadership, the CPPCC must always view it as the fundamental political principle and its major political responsibility, and constantly consolidate its standing, improve its political judgment, political awareness, and political execution, and constantly expand the social and public support of the party's leadership. We need to leverage the advantage of consultative democracy and focus on the targets of building a modern socialist country, and focus on key tasks of the 14th Five-Year Plan and major concerns of the general public. By practicing the consultative democracy, we must transform the will of the party into the consensus and actions of the society. And we need to improve the efficiency of the CPPCC and implement the governance decisions of the party. We need to consolidate our platform and strengthen our political awareness with the innovative theories of the party. The Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era is a guiding thought the party and the country must stick to for a long time.
People's Political Consultative Conference as the key platform to unite, educate and guide representatives of all ethnicities and fields with the innovative party's theory must enhance the ideological and political leadership. With the party's innovative theories, we must enhance political union, ideological progress, and concerted actions. We must attempt to build the learning and practicing platforms guided by scientific theories, featured by consultative exchanges, themed under self-improvement, and targeted at boosting consensus. We must carry forward the fine tradition of self-learning and self-education. We will improve the activity outcomes of members' reading, inspections, and thematic workshops, so as to combine the targets of ideology and theory learning with the target of practicing. We must profoundly study the CPC history together with the new history of China, history of reform and opening up, and history of socialist development. We pay attention to the special features of CPPCC so that with history review we will be more reasonable, faithful, ethical, and practical. Thus, with one mind, we will boost initiative and capability of developing socialism with Chinese characteristics in this new era. We must open more important channels to galvanize forces to embark on this new journey. Given the new development stage, we must execute new development concept, lay out new development landscape. This more urgently requires us to boost cohesion and cement consensus. People's Political Consultative Conference as a significant channel of diffusing conflicts and consolidating consensus on the common ideological and political basis must do more to publicize policies and dispel confusions. We must build up the morale to unite and develop together. By boosting confidence, drawing hearts, and building consensus, we must transfer positive energy to the whole society. We must give play to the features of high inclusiveness and wide connection, to innovate the forms of field-related mass work, and we must comprehensively harness the forms of members' lectures and the workshops of the major special work and personnel exchanges. We must constantly improve the system of CPPCC, organizing members and members guiding the masses of all circles, forging the mighty power of soliciting ideas for better policies and uniting as one to open a new chapter. Fellow members, in a big economy, we shoulder heavier responsibilities. Standing on the conjunction road of two centenary goals, our missions summon us, and responsibilities fall upon us. We must more closely unite around the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping as the core and aggressively give play to the ox spirit. We must dive actively into the great practice of building a socialist modern society in an all-round way and developing special consultative organs and people's political consultation undertaking. With gratifying results, we will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the founding of CPC. Please all rise. And sing the national anthem. Now I declare the fourth session of the 13th National Committee of CPPCC concludes.
So this year's CPPCC session has officially concluded. In his concluding remarks, China's top political advisor Mr. Wang Yang said this year's session, 6.5 days session, has deliberated on the government work report and a proposal on China's 14th five-year plan, and also a work report on the National Committee of the CPPCC. A very tight but efficient schedule there. He also said the main focus actually is on China's 14th five-year plan, and also at that closing ceremony, political advisors have adopted a political resolution from the CPPCC National Committee. So, gentlemen, we've talked about political philosophy quite a lot. Now let's get to real issues, especially those raised in the 14th five-year plan. What would you say would be the most difficult parts, Mr. Bram, in China's transformation in its development model from high speed to high quality, especially with this new development philosophy and also the dual circulation put in place?
Well, first of all, to look at a little bit of what's happened over the past 40 years. In the 80s and 90s, China adopted what was really a classic import substitution, export promotion policy. It depended on the world consumption of Chinese cheap products at the time, and keeping the currency at a certain level to be able to import technology, equipment, have investment come into the country, pour into the country in order to drive that export economy. And it depended primarily on consumption from Western economies. Now, you're in a new era. You're in an era of decoupling. You're in an era of deglobalization. And so that landscape is changing very dramatically. And you also have the fact that the high-speed growth carried with it certain social imbalances and environmental problems. So let's look first of all at the social imbalances, environmental problems. You had a focus on industrialization in the coastal areas. Population shifted from the rural areas to the coast. The villages were often left with just old people and kids. And you had too much congestion in the cities, too much pressure on infrastructure. At the same time, the industrialization policies drove forward a lot of pollution that affected people's water security, health care, and food security. Now, looking ahead, in the era of decoupling and deglobalization, China's looking inward. So now you have this bifurcated policy of still maintaining a degree of export promotion, but focusing more on imports within the domestic economy itself. And that means shifting people from the urban areas on the coast back to the villages. That means creating not just villages, but ecological cities that offer the same benefits as the coastal areas, so people can go home. They can go back to their own communities and build those communities. In turn, that's a form of growth. And the huge emphasis on environmental policy, backed by the finance of green bonds. This is the largest green bond issuer in the world right now. And if we look at that going into smart green and blue infrastructure that's changing the grid, the projections are ahead. By 2050, China will be 80% green energy. No other country in the world is going to be able to do that. We always hear about Tesla, but China's got more than 20 electric car companies and growing, meeting local demand, not just the high-end demand, that Tesla's an elite car, but actually for the broad population, backed by the infrastructure of electric charging stations that are going to be able to make this very feasible and possible. And it's not just about the cars, because it's what kind of electricity are they using? That's coming from what kind of grid? And before, 80% of China's energy was coal. It's a dramatic shift away from coal, which then means you have to reboost the economies of provinces like Shanxi, Ningxia region, Inner Mongolia, which are coal dependent for their economics, and shift it to wind, to other sources of energy and other sources of prosperity, shifting the entire grid around. And so this is actually, the leadership under this 5-year plan is not looking at environmental protection as something that's blocking growth. We heard a lot of that from the Trump administration. Oh, environment protection is going to stop growth. No, they're looking at it as an opportunity for a new kind of growth, a sustainable and systematic growth. And in turn, that comes back to the education issue, because it means retraining people in a host of areas, because environmental considerations runs across the board: finance, monetary policy, law, agriculture, infrastructure, everything. is affected by this now. And so that's what we're going to be seeing in the years ahead as we move into this 5-year plan and beyond.
And that could be one of the greatest shifts in human history. And we'll continue to talk about that very soon. Now, let's get more highlights from the closing ceremony of this year's CPPCC session. China's top political advisor Wang Yang just gave a short summary of the discussions held over the past 6.5 days. Take a listen.
Members deliberated on the government's work reports, the draft guideline of the 14th Five-Year Plan, as well as other reports. Members also reviewed the work report of the CPPCC National Committee. We made policy suggestions and consolidated the consensus, reaching positive results, which fully reflected the sense of responsibilities of all the CPPCC members, which also demonstrated the advantages of CPPCC as a top political advisory body.
Right, and Wang Yang just mentioned the importance of the functions of CPPCC members in terms of both advising and supervising, indeed. And he called for stronger ties between political advisors and the people, as well as allowing CPPCC to oversee major issues concerning big policies such as the 14th Five-Year Plan. And I've noticed, comparing with the 13th Five-Year Plan, the 14th Five-Year Plan is more human-oriented. Let me raise two examples. For instance, comparing with the last plan, changes like this happened. Internet popularity shifted to digital economy. It's a percentage in the whole GDP. And also the underemployment people changed the unemployed people to surveyed urban unemployment rate. So from those changes, we can see that China's 14th Five-Year Plan is one is more human-oriented, and the other one is shifting from quantity or high-speed development to high-quality development. So what's the challenge of doing that for China with such a big population?
The very big challenge Lawrence mentioned a lot, actually, is we're no longer talking about GDP now, per se. We are talking about GDP growth plus carbon intensity. It's constraints. There is so much you can grow. So every GDP you produce, what's the carbon you have released? So this is so important, and China has pledged to the world by 2030 will peak carbon emission. 2035.
Yes.
Okay. Then 2060 carbon neutral. So what you should be watching is 3 sets of technologies: low carbon, zero carbon, negative carbon. And how years down the road China will combine those. I say technology, it includes institutional technologies, carbon market, for instance, to mix those to accomplish two goals: growth, green growth. And while talking about domestic market, eventually you need to look at what's the best way for us to grow the middle class. I guess the number I have about the Chinese middle class is 400 million now. It would be better to double that size, so that we really have the capacity to talk about domestic market. At the end of the day, going to the topic we loved, it's education, because now you see resource people, technology. Well, actually, it's about the brain.
Right.
You need to elevate the level of human brains.
I wish we have more time to continue our discussion. Very interesting, very fun, and very incisive discussions. Maybe next time. All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen, Professor Fu and Lawrence.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
And that's all for today's special coverage of CPPCC closing session. And tomorrow, legislators will wrap up their annual session at the Great Hall of People, and Chinese Premier Li Keqiang will meet the press afterwards. So we'll bring you live coverage of that.
Yes, that's it for today's live coverage on China's annual political season. But don't go away. Very soon, my colleague Zhou Yang will bring more global updates for you. Do stay tuned on CGTN. Bye for now.
Bye for now.